All right, I think we're going to get started, and I want to start by thanking everybody for coming on tonight and being a part of this program. It's really heartwarming to see your faces. It's been a long time. We've been stuck inside for a long time, and at least if we can come together for a little bit of time, relive some of our moments together on our trip and our experience, and to be inspired with Tzvi and with Pinchas, who I welcome tonight. I also want to acknowledge Zach Karelic from H Toronto, and myself. My name is Isaac Oziel. I'm the chair of the Living Legacy Experience. I see some faces that haven't participated in the Living Legacy Experience and those that were supposed to be leaving this Sunday with us. So we are planned for next May 2021, May the 23rd. And we set this evening up to sort of coincide with our arrival back to Toronto with those that went in 2018 and 2019. We came back 1 year ago today for some of us, and tomorrow for the second year, I believe. And it's wonderful to be able to, I want to introduce Tzvi Sperber. He's the founder of J-Roots. He's our trip provider. He's our senior educator. He's our beacon of light. And I can go on and on. But I think most importantly and pertinent to now is that he's in Israel. And it's 2:35 in Israel. And he's willing and always willing to help the Living Legacy and to further Holocaust education. So I want to thank Tzvi for taking the time to do this. And I'm sure you recognize a lot of familiar faces as well. It's really, really nice to see everybody on screen. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Mark Mincer and Annette Mincer for sponsoring tonight's event. We're doing it in memory of Mark's dad, Ben Mincer, Zichrono Livracha. May his soul be blessed. He passed away a few months ago. And tonight we're dedicating the evening to Mark's dad. I wanted to also, a lot of people ask me why I got into Holocaust education, and I've mentioned many times that I'm Sephardic. I come from, my parents are both from Morocco, and so I wasn't raised the way a lot of you were with the Holocaust and hearing the stories and meeting the survivors. And a lot of times I relate to the story in 2008, where I was at an incredible event for young adults. And the keynote speaker of that evening was Pinchas Gutter, who is our guest tonight. And Pinchas got up in front of 550 people and spoke about his experience during the Holocaust, and then talked about something that really, really impacted me. And those of you that have heard from Irene as well, she would have spoken about this incredible Pesach of April 1943. And during that time, whether Pinchas is going to touch upon it or not, it was very impactful for me to hear it, so I want to share it firsthand. But Pinchas shared his experience during Passover of that year in the Warsaw Ghetto, and where he was, and the situation that it had been, and how dire the situation was. And despite that all, they still had the wherewithal to celebrate Passover with as best as they could, in the occasion that they had, to celebrate life as best as they could, and to thank God for where they were. And after hearing that, I said, if this individual with his family could do what he did for his Judaism, and what does it say about me, who lives in Canada, in a free society where I can practice any which way I want? And from that day forward, I was connected to the inspiration that a Holocaust survivor brings, the perspective that they bring, the life that they live, and just the being around them is completely inspiring. So Pinchas, in front of everybody here, I want to thank you for who you are. And it's incredibly unfortunate, the story that you had to go through and your life story. But you seem to have risen and inspired hundreds and thousands of people over the years to continue to believe in humanity, in Judaism, and to live a noble life. And I owe a lot of that to you, and I want to thank you for that. So without further ado, because I'm not one of many words, I'd like to turn it over to Tzvi, who will initiate this program and take us through the evening.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Just tell me if you can. I hope you can. Welcome again. As Isaac said, it's a little different time, excuse me, here in Israel. But it's so great to see so many of your faces here on the screen, sporting your Corona haircuts. Okay, that people haven't managed to get. I can see it from some of the people. I just to bring you up to date and up to speed on what's happening here in Israel a little bit, and with J-Roots, of course. J-Roots, like so many other people and who are involved in this field, whether in tourism in Israel or whether outside of Israel, have been grounded completely. And it's been rather depressing from that perspective, but we've been able to at least set up all these types of exciting things that we're doing now, journeys from home, where we're teaching and educating over the internet to various people around the world. Sometimes at crazy hours, just like this one, but we're doing our best to manage to survive, which is not going to be easy, especially with I would say the forecast that people are speaking about now. But we'll hopefully we'll be able to manage to keep going. In Israel itself, as you know, it's coming out of Corona. We're coming out, basically. We did very well. We kept it at the door. But with the schools going back now, unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a rise of cases that there are now of kids and schools and day schools that are being shut down because of Corona. But the workplace has basically got back to normal, and restaurants are open, bars are open, Machane Yehuda, okay, is open, the market in Jerusalem, the Kotel is open, everything is open, back not to normal. We're praying in synagogues for up to 70 people. We're still social distancing, we're meant to be wearing masks, not everybody's listening to that. And we are just hoping very, very much that there won't be a second wind of Corona come the winter. Of course, everyone's terrified about the winter here in Israel because in the worst week that we have, or we had last year, of flu, over 200,000 people got flu in 1 week. And that will mean, a big disaster, I should say, when it comes to Corona. But we're doing our best to be able to continue, and all of our eyes are always towards the communities abroad to make sure that you guys are okay as well. Really, you should know that so many of us in Israel are thinking about you every single day, hoping and praying that you'll get through this as well, and that all the Jewish people will once again be able to visit and come back home to Israel, and we'll be able to meet in various different places and continue the relationship that we've had so far, and new relationships as well. But it's not about J-Roots or about Israel tonight. It's about really, I want to introduce Pinchas Gutter, who I would very much, I think that many of us know Pinchas today, and it's not necessarily even from a story that you might have read before. You will know that Pinchas is very famous today because of the holograms and the fact that I think he was the first, if I'm not mistaken, Holocaust survivor that has been sat in a chair, and around the world now people can ask Pinchas Gutter questions that he answers, which is incredible to see what has happened to Holocaust education. And we'll get to that, of why he agreed to do that a little later on. But Pinchas Gutter, I have since my beginning as well of Holocaust education, which was a long time ago. I guided my first group in 1993. And I met Pinchas along the way in March and Living in Toronto as well, in one of the seminars that I ran there. But his story was one of the first stories that I got to know in Majdanek, I have to say. Which, of course, we're going to follow now a little bit of Pinchas' story, and then try and bring it towards what happened after the war and how he managed to rebuild himself after the war. When we know so many different types of stories like this, but his is exceptional as well. So I'd like to introduce Pinchas. I can't see him for some reason, but I'm sure that will be, if Pinchas can speak, I'll be able to see him. Anyway, is Pinchas there? Oh, there you are. Can you hear me, Pinchas?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So, first of all, once again, thank you so much for giving up your time and being with us this evening. So I'm gonna, for those people who don't know your story, I'm gonna run through a few parts of your story and stop at a few places that I'd like to ask you some questions, if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Pinchas was born in Lodz to a family of Gera Hasidim. I think you were born on Zachodnia Street, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I was born on Zachodnia 54, and
Right,
it used
so
to be next to the synagogue. The Zachodnia 56 was the synagogue, and Zachodnia 54 was actually a building that belonged to my grandfather, and part of my family actually. I mean, basically, the building was mainly Jews living in that building. It was right in the center of town, and we had a shul downstairs. And of course, I never went to a shul because we always went down to the shtibel. I mean, that's where I think my brit was, and my of course I would have had my bar mitzvah there, but unfortunately by that time the war interfered, and we left Łódź. My mother and sister, I had a twin sister, and my mother and sister and because we were blonde and blue-eyed, and we could pass as Christians, and we spoke pure Polish because my grandfather, who was a Gera Chosid from my mother's side, he was a farmer in Wielun. And there we mixed a lot with the Polish workers and everything, and I always spoke Polish with my mother and Yiddish with my father. So we spoke a pure Polish that you couldn't recognize that we were Jewish, because my father, when he spoke Polish, you could recognize he was a Jew because he spoke with a Yiddish accent, for the Gemara.
Right.
He used to get up every morning. I remember even when I was a little boy, and I'm talking about when I was a little boy, I was like a year and a half, crawling under the table, and my father used to get up early in the morning before going to the winery, because he was a winemaker, and he would get up and he would take a big shas, a Vilna shas used to be very big, and he would put it on the table, and he would learn a Blatt Gemara. So
I remember listening early on to a very beautiful story of you as a kid. I've stood outside the house many years ago, okay, and I told this story of you as a child. That obviously very early on, your family instilled tzedakah, charity, into you. You spoke about your grandfather used to leave coins by the door, I think, at one time.
My grandfather was a grocer about tzedakah, and before he went to work to the cellars, because he also was a winemaker. We were winemakers for 400 years in Poland, and from father to grandfather to great-grandfather. So he used to take all his small change, used to stack it up next to the door, and he would tell, he had a maid who worked for him, a Jewish maid, and he would say, if a beggar, there were a lot of beggars, in Łódź, if he comes and rings at the door, you must give him, groschen and so forth and so on. And he also said, when the money runs out and they're hungry, you must go and give them food to eat. Please don't forget, don't ever turn anybody away without doing something for them.
Amazing.
And that was my grandfather. And it was something that I learned from, and my father too. Both of them were really, we were middle class. We weren't very wealthy. We weren't very poor. We were like, very, very comfortable winemakers. We had a big concession from Stock brandies, and Stock was from Austria, where they made we had the concession for Poland. So we were quite well off, and basically this is what I remembered. And I remember lots of things from before the war. I've got, fortunately or unfortunately, I've got a very good memory, and a lot of the things I don't want to remember, but you have to remember, and you have to. I mean, listen. As far as I'm concerned, I tell my story because I believe and I interact with people because I believe it's my duty to do that. It's my duty to tell about the life in Poland before the war and during the war, and what happened there. And I think it's for, you know, we are a nation, a people, a culture that has existed for thousands of years, and we are going to continue. And we must know all the good things and the bad things that happen to us. And it's very important for us to, you know, and it's important for me that the memory of my parents, my grandparents from both sides, my uncles, my aunts, my great uncles, we were a family between 150 and 200 people in Poland before the war. And
right.
five cousins survived the war.
So you were speaking about your grandfather and your father and how they instilled tzedakah, charity, into you. After you left Lodz, okay, and you finally arrived to Warsaw, and you were then taken into the ghetto. You actually were in Nowolipki Street on the ghetto there. Nalewki, excuse me. You spoke about, in one of your videos, you spoke about the fact that your mother used to make chalot, and your father used to make wine, and used to go and deliver it to people, okay, in order to make sure they also had. And you're somebody that lived in your kitchen as well. The tzedakah was immense in your house, it seems like.
Yeah, my father took him almost 3 months to arrive in Łódź. We went by train as Christians, but he arrived. And when he arrived, we were living with my aunt, who was married to a Warsaw. His name was Vovo Spiegelglas. And they lived in the Loktralna number 14 in Warsaw. And by the time that we arrived already, there were about 17 people in their small apartment living together. When my father arrived, he started looking for a place. And he found one on the corner of Nalewki and Mila. You know, Mila, Nalewki number 49, the front of the building was destroyed by a bomb during the bombardment of Warsaw in 1939. And the rest of the building, you know, survived. So he found a small apartment, a bedroom with a kitchen, and the facilities were actually on the, you know, in the hallways. And that's where he started. That's the only thing he could do. So he started rigged up in the little kitchen, you know, a kind of still where to make. He used to buy raisins and you can make wine from anything. You can make wine from, there's nothing you can't make wine from. But of course, this was to make Kiddush, you have to make it from grapes. So he would buy raisins on the black market before the ghetto started, because the ghetto only finished up in the beginning of November, it was closed up. But before the ghetto, for quite a while, I would run around the town and I would collect the bottles from kefis, from Polish Christian ones, and anyway, and he would wash I don't know where he bought the corks, but we would put water into the bottles for a couple of days to make them kosher, and then he had the 2 stills, 2 barrels, and then he had something to purify the wine. He had linen socks, you know, hanging from it, and he would make Kiddush wine. Before the war, they made wine for all kinds of things for everybody, and not even for Jews. They made wine for the whole of Poland, and so forth. It was called Złote Grono. Złote Grono was the grape, golden grape. That was the name. And and then I would go around, collect the bottles, and then on Fridays, my father would give me a list and a rucksack, and I would put these bottles in, and then I would go around, and people who, this is in the Warsaw Ghetto, there were quite a lot of wealthy people, and even before that, and they could afford to, and this is how he made a living in the beginning and until deportations. That's what he was doing. He was making wine, and my mother, in the beginning, she had a little kind of a window, you know, you send it behind the window, and she was selling sweets and cigarettes and stuff like that. And then after 6-7 months, I think she couldn't get it. She would start buying flour and make little challahs, and I would also deliver the challahs together with the wine to people who could afford it. And this is how he made a living in the Warsaw Ghetto.
So I'm going to jump you all the way forward here, because in 1940, as you said, November 1940, the walls were closed basically, and the doors were closed to the ghetto. And those of us that have read quite a lot about the Holocaust will know that the deportations will start in November 9, excuse me, in the summer of 1942, in July of 1942. Can you sort of recall the beginning of the great deportations of the summer of 1942?
In 1942, on the 22nd of July, suddenly appeared placards on the walls. And on these placards, it said that because of unemployment, because of sickness, because this, that, and the other, I don't remember exactly what was written on it, but I know, we read those placards, and in it said that not everybody is going to be relocated. They didn't use the word deportation, they used relocation. And they're going to go to the east, where you're going to go families together, and you can take 15 kilo of each person can take 15 kilo of their goods with them, and the families must come together. You're going to get food for the journey. They actually spelled it out. You're going to get 3 kilo, you're going to get bread, and you're going to get marmalade for the journey, and you're going to be working and happy, and everything's going to be fine. My father.
But you must have witnessed this. You must have witnessed seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, no, my father, who was beaten up badly in the beginning of the war, when they came to arrest my grandfather, which my father took him down to the cellars. He was beaten unconscious, and they thought he was dead. But the caretaker from where the cellars were, he risked his life. A Christian caretaker put him on his back, and it was curfew. He brought him to our house, and my father was unconscious for about a week or 5-6 days. And Dr. Hirschwinkler, you remember our doctor, treated him, and eventually he recovered. But he never trusted the Nazis anything. And despite the fact that they used to issue documents, and how my father, who was a very humble and gentle person, became a giant, because he hid us. He didn't trust the Germans at all. So from the beginning, when the Jewish police were actually doing all the work of the Nazis by taking people to the Umschlagplatz for deportation to Treblinka, within a few weeks we knew already. So we were always hidden. And right. I saw the Jewish police taking people out, but we were hidden in places where they hopefully wouldn't find us, under all kinds of places that my father found. He would lock us in somewhere, and then he would find himself. And we managed to exist in the Warsaw Ghetto from 1942 in July 22nd, all the time until May 1943, 3 weeks after the uprising started.
So I want to take two pivotal moments that for me, when I learned your story a number of years ago, okay, really stood out for me. One of them was Kol Nidre in 1942 with your father, and the other one, as Isaac already mentioned, was a Seder that you had on the eve of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. If you could speak a little bit about those.
In Yom Kippur 1942, they had the actions. They would have an action. They called them aktia, and they would have a Aussiedlung, which means deportations, and then they would have like 5, 6, 7 weeks, and then there would be a break. And then whenever there was a Jewish festival, anything like that, they would start all over again. And one of the things was, in 1942 Yom Kippur, my father and a lot of other Gereh Hasidim from the area, we were hiding in an attic behind a false wall, where the caretaker, the Jewish caretaker of the building, of 1949, Nalevki 49, he actually, we went right up underneath the roof, and there was an attic there, or he created an attic with stuff in front, you couldn't see anything, with a lot of machinery and stuff, and we were behind, and we were davening for Yom Kippur. And my father took me to his body. He hugged me, and he took his talus, put it right over me, and he kept me there. And then, of course, they were crying and, you know, begging for deliverance and praying. And I managed to get out of my father's, hands, and I went in between. As you look, they were in the roof. You could see outside, you know, what was going on. You could actually see the corner of Nalevki and Mila. And the Jewish police were still active at the time, together with the Ukrainians and the Latvian, Lithuanians. I mean, all these people came and they were persecuting us, and they were shooting people, and they were making they were taking the people, they were killing them. They were telling the Jewish police to stack them up. And I saw the Jewish police picking up men, women, and children and stacking them up in a corner like you put logs of wood. And, you know, this little boy, who was then, 10 years old, was watching this. And I want to tell you something. I don't even remember what my emotions were, because I think that in a situation like that, you don't see anything, you don't hear anything. You just, all I know, I can tell you, I am the cantor of the Kiev Shul. I've been the cantor for the last 30 odd years. And when I stand for Kol Nidre night and I start Kol Nidre, Kol Nidre, I'm not in the Kiev Shul. I'm not on the Bima in the Kiev Shul. I am in Nalevki 1949 in the Boidim. A Boidim, you know what a Boidim is? It's an attic. I am standing in the Boidim, and my father's talus over me, and I'm saying Kol Nidre. That's how I remembered it. This is what comes in front of my eyes. That, when I hear people saying that Jews did not resist, they didn't, they went like sheep we resisted non-stop. We resisted spiritually. We resisted everything that we were not allowed to do. We did in the Warsaw Ghetto. Not only that, but in the forests, there were many, when the Nazis started the war between Russia, there were thousands of Jews living in forests and killing Germans and running away, and ghettos. There was continuous resistance. But resistance doesn't necessarily mean resistance with a gun in your hand. Resistance is when you do spiritual and social and you resist with your body, with your heart, with your feelings, with your emotions. You do everything to resist the Nazis. And
your resistance continued even into Pesach as well.
Yeah, and then on the 19th of April, 1943, we had already under the ruins of that building in Nalevki 49. Underneath the ruins, they built like a mine. Underneath the ruins, they built a bunker. They used to call them bunkers for over 150 people. And it was like two big rooms on the side with an entrance in the middle, and there was a trapdoor. You went right down. And they prepared electricity and water. They worked for several months on that until they did that. On the 19th of April, my mother woke us up. I have to tell you the whole story. She woke us up early in the morning because they got the warning from the telephones worked in the ghetto. They got a warning that the Nazis are coming in to take the rest of us to be killed. And my mother, because she was so concerned about her children and mother's heart, so she decided that each child has to have two rajtuzy. Rajtuzy in Polish means, like women's tights. You completely woolen, where you put the children used to have, woolen socks that went right up to you like a woman's tights. And she put two pairs so the Chas v'Chalila, her children shouldn't get cold in the bunker. And my father, of course, had wine left over from his wine, and he took the wine down. There was a baker not far from where we were living. There was a bakery who must have made matzah, and we went down, and in the evening, with crying, with prayers, I mean, these were all very religious, emotional Jews, and they knew the Haggadah off by heart. They didn't have to, need Haggadah. And they were praying for deliverance, but still celebrating the miracles of deliverance from Egypt and hoping that Ribono Shel Olam would give us deliverance, from the Nazis. And we were in that bunker for almost 3 weeks, because in the first week of May, we were discovered and taken out.
You were taken with your father, Menachem Mendel, and your mother, Helena, and your twin sister, Sabina, I think you called her.
My mother's name, Helena, was her Polish name, but her real name was Chaya Yenta. That's what my mother's name was, Chaya Yenta.
And they used to call your twin sister, Sabina. Is that correct?
My twin sister was Sabina, but her name was after our grandmothers who passed away, and her name was Shifra Trano. Right. Shifra Trano. This was her year. This is how I remember them. I remember my mother as Chayenta and Shifra Trano.
So you went from there, unfortunately, to the Umschlagplatz. You were there for a couple of days in the building next to the Umschlagplatz that many of us who have been to Warsaw have seen, and we've also heard from the terrible things that took place in that building, also with you. And Helena Birnbaum's famous testimony that takes place there with her brother as well in the same building. And you were chipped off to
Helena Birnbaum was in that same bunker. She was in the bunker of...
with you?
Yeah, well, she was there because she was in number 3 Mila in Nalevki 49, where she, in her book where she writes, she writes in that bunker, and she was in that bunker.
Wow. Yeah. So you were shipped off to Majdanek on that day, after a couple of days. And finally, you're standing there, and unfortunately, this is the last time that you're going to see your dear mother and your sister. And I remember hearing a very, very sad testimony of yours that you can't exactly remember the face of your sister. But only
I can't. Not only can't I remember. You see, when we arrived in Majdanek, they separated men from women. My father, who was like a giant, he was like a malach min hashamayim, because he kept, we were never hungry in the Warsaw Ghetto. Can you believe it? Where 100,000 people nearly died from hunger and disease. My father, who was this very gentle person, managed to keep us not only safe, but also we were not hungry. Even when I was ill, he managed to get unkosher horse flesh, which they cooked into a yoich because the doctor said that I have to have it, and I refused to eat it because it was treifa, and they forced it down to me to make me well. Now, in Majdanek, when we arrived, my father said to me, he took me with the men. When they were dividing, I was quite tall, a head taller than my sister, although we were twins. And he took me and he said, if they ask you, you must say you're 5 years older. And my sister somehow was separated from my mother, and she was, they separated men from women, women with children, children on their own. And my mother and my sister I was watching her. She was pushed towards children. She saw then my mother. I was watching my mother. She was with the women. She ran towards my mother. She had a beautiful long braid of, she had blonde hair, a long braid that my mother braided, and so she was running, and I was watching that braid, and then she hugged my mother, and after hugging my mother, I saw her back, and I saw the braid, and since that time, we lived together for 11 years, especially in the Warsaw Ghetto. We lived all four of us in the same room. We had, my parents had, had their 2 beds, and we had 2 little beds on the side. And I forgot everything about my sister, especially not only her face, but everything. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. During the pre-war, we used to take the children to the baker. And then on Saturday, after davening, we would run with a little settle and to get the children from the baker. So we would give us the baker, and I know that I was holding one side of the top pot and she was holding the other, and we were very happily going back home, with the whole meal, because the meat was there and the pudding was there. It was all done in a ceramic. It was beautiful. And I know she's walking beside me, but I can't see her. So, I mean, we shared the room until when we were about a year and a half or two, our cots were separated. Her cot was at a wall and mine was next to the door. In our children's room. We had a room with a balcony outside in the building that we were. We were on the first floor. And I've forgotten everything. I mean, visually, I cannot see anything about my sister. So it is the first time I told this story, which was many, many years ago, I broke down and I wept. And it's been very difficult for me, the fact that all I remember is the braid. And when I made the virtual reality film called The Last Goodbye, when they showed it in the Tribeca Festival, where it won a big prize, the placard of it was just the braid of my sister. And then, of course, my mother and my father and my sister were murdered by the Nazis the day that we arrived in Majdanek, and I was the only one that the Boine Shalom spared. And that's how I can tell the story.
You're left alone in Majdanek. I remember you telling the story of being in the showers after going through the disinfection vats and standing there saying Shema Yisrael and not knowing where your father was, and then the same person that lived in the kitchen in your house finally told you or look towards Shamayim, I should say, look towards heaven.
Yeah, I met a man who my father used to bring at night people to sleep in the kitchen, who were, didn't have anywhere to place, because lots of people were living in the streets in Warsaw Ghetto. There wasn't enough room for everybody.
Right.
And then I met this man, and I thought if I was alive, then, maybe the showers, he was also alive. And I looked for him and I couldn't find him. So I went up to this man and I asked him, and I said, "Did you see my father? Did you see my father?" And he didn't answer for a while. And eventually he raised his eyes to heaven. And I knew that my father wasn't alive.
So I can't go into every story just for a lack of time today, but I mean, the stories in Majdanek of you with the capo, the very cool capo that you had there, and the Dutch Jews that helped you in the kitchen, and working in the flower beds, being beaten, and then finally stepping out of line to volunteer to be. You didn't know where you were going to be going, but many people were taken to the gas chambers when they volunteered, but you were taken to Skarzitsko, the ammunition camp, which I don't think many of us have been to. I've been there, but I'm not sure whether many of the people that are watching you now have been to. There's a whole book out on it now, for those of you that are interested to know a little bit more about what went on, by Christopher Browning, if I'm not mistaken. He just brought out a book on the camp a couple of years ago. And that's he
wrote about Starachowice, which was a similar camp. But
he's spoken about Skarzitsko.
He didn't write about Skarzitsko. He wrote about a camp called Starachowice, which was near Radom also. But Starachowice was a Hermann Göring Werke. Ours was Hassak, Hugo Schneider Aktiengesellschaft. So there, it's fine. I don't expect you to remember everything that you read about me.
And then I'm just going to pick up on one story.
In me, it's so embedded that, I haven't forgotten anything, unfortunately.
Unbelievable.
So it's so embedded that even whatever happened, it's just right in front of me. And right. I've got friends who actually survived Starachowice.
Wow. So I can see up here somebody's parents met in the camp there, which is incredible. I don't know who that was, but because it went off too quickly. But I just want to mention one story there that you spoke about, which was of the Oberscharführer. I think his name was Schultz. If he was the Oberscharführer or the commandant of the camp, who was at the end of the camp, basically was doing a selection. And then somebody took you into a barrack and saved you by changing your clothes and everything. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. What actually happened? You want me to tell the story? What happened?
In short.
Well, basically, what happened is that when we arrived from work the night before, it was Erev Tisha. It was actually Tisha B'Av, and they always chose something special. So it was Tisha B'Av, and that I didn't know the day or the day of the month, but I knew the Chagim and I knew it was Tisha B'Av. And then you had to go in front of the commander, Schultz, and he was sitting in front of his office in the window, and you had to give your name. And when you gave your name, he made a tick. You saw him making a tick. The next morning, we weren't taken to work. We had a appel, they made us stand, and then he started calling out names, and he said that those people whose names are going to be called out are going to go by train because they're evacuating the camp, and then there aren't enough wagons for everybody, so others will have to walk. But basically, this was a selection. So when we had doctors in Skaržisko, a woman doctor was very, very well known, and she was treating the German families and the Ukrainians and all the others, and she was on very good term with our Yemach Shemo Schultz. And we always saw them walking together. So the Jewish police and the Jewish administration of the camp were allowed to have their families, and it was. I can't tell you the whole story of Skaržisko because it would take me hours and hours. But so he called out the mother, and she came standing where we were standing because he called out my name, my best friend's name, and then so she ran. And she had hold of his hand, and and she started, please let me go with my mother, and he wouldn't. And then suddenly he called the mother, and he shot the mother and her on the spot. So we knew this was a selection. So we started running, and I started hiding. First, I jumped into a chest where the dead bodies were. And then I jumped out, and because I must have been so terrified, and the barracks were built on stilts, so I burrowed myself like an animal to hide. And the policemen, the Jewish policemen, of course, all the Ukrainians and the SS and others started, finding us. We were surrounded by, barbed wire, and there was nowhere to run. He found me, Katz, the Jewish policeman that I was in his work group. And when I looked after his wife when she was dying for 6-7 months of TB, I was her nurse. He found me and he said, I'm gonna try and help you. He took me to the barrack of the police, took all my rags off, I had paper on my feet, I already didn't have shoes, with wire, and he gave me stiefel. You know what a stiefel is? It's like high boots, like the police wore, and he gave me proper shirt, and he got dressed me like a human being. He gave me a hat to wear, not a police hat, that's an ordinary hat. And he said, there's going to be an appel, there's going to be a new, way, and there's going to be a selection, and hopefully with God's help, you will survive. And this is that's how he saved my life, because Schultz came and stood in front of me, and I thought he was going to take me because he recognized me when he made the tick, but he didn't. And there's a beautiful story of that. He took my best friend who was standing next to me in rags, and he pushed him towards the condemned people who were then guarded by the Ukrainians and the Nazis with machine guns, and anybody tried to run away from that group, they would shoot them on the spot. And I grieved him. His name was Yaakov. And then in 2002, when I went back to Poland for the first time, and I'm not going to tell the story, but I found him by chance. And how did I find him? He was the head of the child survivors of the Holocaust in Poland. He went back to Poland to look for his parents who ran away to Russia. His father died in Russia of epidemic. His uncle came back, and he stayed in Poland, and he became a professor at the university in astrophysics or something very well known. And he married a Catholic woman, had Catholic children, had a Catholic home, but he kept in touch and became the head of the Jewish Holocaust child survivors. So when I wanted to meet with him, so I met him. And we had a long chat, and he asked me, how did you survive? And I asked him, how did he survive? And he told me he survived because he had nothing to lose. And they were holding hands, the Jewish police and others. And he went to the Ukrainian, kind of got to the end of it, and he bit one of the, I can't remember, it was a Nazi or somebody, and there was a mayhem. He started running, they started shooting, they didn't hit him, and the next day, we were all sent out from the camp. He was sent to Schlieben, I was sent to Częstochowa, but I didn't know that. I didn't know who he was. But when he got up to say goodbye, I noticed that he was hinking, he was limping a little bit. And Yaakov was the only person that was born with his right foot quite shorter than his left. It was something that it was generic. It was, he was born with a few centimeters short. And I recognized him. Of course, it meant nothing to him, but it meant a lot to me. And I broke down and cried because I suddenly, somebody who I greeted for 50 odd years, suddenly came to life.
So you mentioned that you were sent.
Sorry. It was a miracle, an absolute miracle.
Yeah, in 2002. So you mentioned, because we have to, I want to take us to a different part of your life story, that you went to Częstochowa. From Częstochowa, you went to Buchenwald. Okay, thankfully, because of the company you worked with, you were then sent to Colditz after that. Okay, because if you would have stayed in Buchenwald, there's no guarantee that you would have made it through the war, even though it was January 1945 by this time. You're in Colditz, and from Colditz, you finally arrived to Theresen, where this man, and I just want to, for the people that are watching this, in case you haven't realized, Pinchas was 11 at the beginning of the war. We're not talking about a person that was a grown, 22-year-old, 11 years old, and survived the war, doing all sorts of things, miraculous things, and really touched on
I was 8 when the war started. I was 11. You were 8? I was 11 in 1943. When I got to Majdanek, I was 11.
Okay, so my mistake. You were 11. Okay, in 43. That means you were 13 at the end of the war. And then
I had my bar mitzvah in a concentration camp in Częstochowa. Wow. I actually had my bar mitzvah.
Wow.
Go on.
So in Theresen, towards the end, at the end of the war, you were one of the few people that could get out and go and meet the Russians that came in to liberate you. And this is, I think, a pivotal moment as well for us in your story. Because I remember reading that you saw as the Russians came in, they were expelling as well the Germans there and the families that were living there. Remember, Czechoslovakia, for those of us that remember, also had a lot of Germans that were living there pre-war as well. And expelling them and the humiliation that they were being shown for a man who had gone through the Holocaust by these people, the Germans, even though it wasn't these particular people, all of a sudden there was empathy that you felt for them, or pity that you felt for them, okay, at that time.
Yeah, I felt sorry for them because, these were human beings who were being, and it reminded me how, what happened to us. And despite the fact that these were Germans who were, who were living in Czechoslovakia by Hitler having ethnically cleaned the Czechs out of that area, and now they were being chased out. But these were old women and children and old men and sick people, and they were kind of, they were human beings as far as I was concerned, and I had enormous amount of empathy. I felt for them. I could not feel for them. I think when you suffer and you see other people suffering, when I see today the Rohingya or other people like from the Syrians and on the television scenes, my heart goes out to them, because the fact is that you cannot. I mean, every human being is an individual, is a person, and why should he be? Why should you do that to them? Why do people do that? And I can't help it. I feel, that's what I feel. I feel an enormous emotion, and it was immediate. It wasn't something. It was something that wasn't. I didn't have intelligent. My brain. I never went to school. My brain wasn't developed. I survived because my father told me to say I'm 5 years older. As a matter of fact, when I got all the documents from the Germans after the war, and now I've got all the documentation they wrote out. I am listed as being 5 years older. I was born in 1927 instead of 1932. So the fact is that it comes. It's a natural feeling, I mean, emotions are natural. I mean, you respond with how you feel at that particular moment, and this is what I felt.
Which we'll come back to for something that you I think built after the war. But you went from there to England. Can you just tell us, like, when you arrived to England? I know as somebody who grew up in England and listening to survivors also in England, they spoke about the fact that there wasn't much empathy from the people in England, and they didn't really want to hear the stories of what had taken place.
Well, it wasn't a question that they didn't want to hear the stories. It was, as a matter of fact, when we arrived in Windermere, actually a little place called Troutbeck Bridge near Windermere. I mean, the people that looked after us. There was Rabbi Weiss. He was a very nice rabbi, and he looked after our religious, emotional needs, and we were about 300. We were the first group that UNRWA managed to get the British. The British agreed to take 1,000 children for actually rehabilitation. They didn't say that we could stay there afterwards. They just said that they can bring 1,000 children under the age of 16 to rehabilitation. So most of the boys that went and the girls, we call ourselves the boys, but in actual fact, with most of us, I was the only one who actually was below the age of, I was 13 years old. And they didn't believe me because I was tall. So they thought that I was actually not telling the story, because most of them were made younger. And then when we came back, they gave their true, how old they were. And when I told them, they kept on asking me, how old are you really? I said, that's how old I am. And they wouldn't believe me because I was tall. And of course, they kind of like didn't like the idea. But there, we had plenty to eat, and we were rehabilitated. We had sports, and then all kinds of things. And then after 3 months being there, of course, the rehabilitation, and we kind of, got our kind of meat on our bones. Then I went to a yeshiva in London, and I went to a yeshiva, a hostel. They used to call them hostels. They didn't call them orphanages to make it look nice, but in actual fact, these were orphanages where youngsters were sent. And I went to a yeshiva hostel, and I used to go every day to Whitechapel, and the yeshiva was called the Chofetz Chaim. It was one of these where you had two doors, one for women, one for men. It was a real, I went there not so long ago, a few years ago, with my wife to show her where I was, and I found out it was sold, and it's now a madrasa for Muslims. that whole area, the whole Whitechapel area, is actually Muslim. So the yeshiva became a madrasa.
And then after being in England, the next part in your story that I just want to talk about is you went and enlisted in the Israeli army.
When I arrived in England, I was 13 years old. And then, and I was one of these people who they regarded as being difficult. Why? Because I didn't want to be, I didn't want charity. I wanted to be an individual. I was very much an individual. And so I eventually finished up. After about a year, I finished up by going to work, and I boarded with a family diamond. Although I paid them my wages every week after working, but I became like my family. Mr. and Mrs. Diamond became like my family. They had children, and Victor Diamond, who passed away not so long ago in Australia because he emigrated to Australia. We shared a room. He was 14. I was 14, and we shared a room. And I went to work, and I used to earn £3.50 a week, and then I gave Mrs. Diamond £3, and I kept 50 pence for myself, and that was for whatever I needed, and I was there for quite a while with them. And in 1948, a cousin of mine who survived the war and who ran away from Poland to Paris and started with some friends of his. They started a small textile factory in Bagnolet, in a suburb of Paris. He found from a Red Cross list that I was alive, and he tried very hard to get me to come to And so I went and I lived with them for until I turned 18, and I became I could do what I wanted, because until the age 18 I was not responsible for my own. Somebody had to be my guardian. And then when I became 18, I decided to go to Israel, and I bought the ticket. I didn't go as an Ole. I had a French passport, kind of alien French passport, and I got in Israel. And immediately I went to Israel. I decided I wanted to join the army. So I went to Sarafem, and I went there, and they said, "What do you want?" This blonde, blue-eyed guy who looks like a goy. I mean, what do you want to do here? And I said, "I want to join the army." "Who are you?" I said, "My name is Pinchas Gutter." "Oh, Pinchas Gutter, tell us a little bit." So they took me into a room, and they interrogated me and asked me all kinds of questions. And they said, "Come back in a week's time." And after a week, I came back, and they were quite happy to take me. And I joined the Israeli army. And I wasn't there.
And you were there until just after the Suez?
I was there till, I was there. I was in Israel for 5 years until after the Suez War. And after the Suez War, I went back to England because I met my future wife in Jerusalem, and she went to England. She was a South African Jewish woman, and she went to London, and I followed her. We got married. We got actually married in the Finsbury Park synagogue, where Mr. Diamond used to be the president, and he was still alive. He was an old man, and we got married in the Finsbury Park synagogue, and we had a tea in the house of Mr. and Mrs. Diamond, because they were like my own family. So they made our wedding. I mean, of course, there wasn't a big wedding. It was just, my parents-in-law didn't come to it. It was just Dorothy's late brother now, who was there living in London. So it was him and the family of the Diamond family were our at tea at 5 o'clock. And that.
So you were there. You went then to South Africa, then to Brazil, I think, and then, or vice versa, excuse me, and then you finally made it to Canada in 1985.
Yeah.
If I can ask you now, just a couple of questions before we open this up to everybody else as well. There are questions that people have asked on the chat. Just a couple of things. you know, the world is a world of uncertainty at the present moment. Okay, it's in turmoil. Okay, nobody really knows what the future is going to hold, even in the next few months for people. You're a man who started so many times. Okay, you had to restart, rebuild in so many different countries, and you went to various different places. You know, without any family, only 5 cousins that were left at the end of the war, no support system. Okay, what would you say to people today from your life experience, okay, of the fact that we've been hit by this, there's no other word for it, this plague of corona, that we'll get back on our feet?
I can say them chazak v'yamat, that the fact is that, you know, the human beings are very resilient individuals, and especially the Jewish community in Toronto is a wonderful community, and we look after each other. We try very much. I mean, I made Toronto my home because this is the first place from all the places that you mentioned that was, I never felt at home. It's very interesting that even in Jerusalem, I must tell you, I didn't really feel at home. I felt that I was, you know, I was kind of like temporary. I wasn't, you know, I lived in Cape Town for 20 odd years, 28 years, but I never felt that I was at home. But when I came to Toronto in Canada, and I'm not telling the story how all this happened, I felt that this was a muki menucha. That's a place where you can actually make your home. And I really feel at home here. The Jewish community is wonderful. And I feel that with the help of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that we will get over this, and we will just have to do what we're supposed to do, be isolated, to try and do our best to keep ourselves healthy. And with God's help, we will survive this epidemic. It's not easy for Holocaust survivors to be isolated because, you know, I spoke to some of my friends, you know, in Toronto, Holocaust survivors who I, you know, have been, you know, involved with in the Neuberg Holocaust Education Center, and we feel that this kind of being in kind of well, not only isolated, but being in a situation where you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, and this reminds you of the time. I mean, of course, it's not the same at all. It's nowhere near the same. But it inside you, your brain reacts. You know, it reacts kind of automatically. And it kind of makes you feel that tension that you had. For example, when my father went to buy raisins on the black market, and he went out, and because they were lapufkas, they used to catch people to work, the Jewish police. I mean,
Yeah.
we never knew. My mother was always tittering at home until he came back, and he was okay. So we were always that kind of thing engenders in you a tension. And the fact that you don't know what can happen tomorrow is uncomfortable. Let's put it that way. It's uncomfortable. It's not the end of the world, and we have to come to terms with it. And I think with the help of the Rebbeinu Shalom, we'll get over this, and please God, life will become normal again.
Right. So I'll say something now, and then we'll just open it up for questions as well, just at the end. And you know, there are so many messages that come out from speaking to a person like Pinchas and many other people like this, that we are inspired by so much that they went through and the messages they give. Golden gems, diamonds that are living with us, that we've had the chance to at least you know, here for the last hour together. I was thinking today about something though. It came up in a strange question that was asked by some rabbi or some yeshiva student, I'm not exactly sure. And it shows you how far Jewish law goes, okay, at least in people's imagination. He was asking a question: should you put your mask on with the right hand or the left hand part of the ear first? Which one do you put your hand? Now, who cares? Okay, who cares whether you put on the right or the left? And it certainly doesn't speak about this in halakha and Jewish law. But then I started thinking about this. In Jewish law, though, we do have a halakha of which shoe we should put on first. Which shoe should we put on first? And we talk about the right hand shoe. And the Rambam, Maimonides, comes along and he asks a number of questions of why the right. But then he speaks about something very beautiful. And I think it's something for each and every one of us as well. The Rambam comes along and he says, you put the right one on because when you bend down to the right, you should know that you're going to start your day by forgetting all of your troubles that might be on the wrong side, on the left, but you start with the right by being strong. You get up in the morning and you start by being strong and you carry on your day in that manner. And if you're able to do that, then you're able to understand what it means to be us, to be the Jew. You know, the Jew is never alone, okay? Judaism is a remedy against any solitude. When Jacob remained alone, he had an angel with him that kept him together. And that's the same with community. Community have been able to hold us and surround us and be able to be with us the whole time to make sure that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If a Jew, I remember reading Elie Wiesel once, he said, if a Jew shouts in Kiev, the Jew in Jerusalem hears. But that's the truth. We all hear from our pain and we all hear what we're going through. But we should know that we're able to come out of it. We shouldn't despair, okay, at all by what's going on. There's a beautiful story from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, and he said as follows. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav was listening to his Talmidim, his pupils, who were telling him about terrible pogroms that were taking place. And these pogroms that were taking place, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav stayed there and he was silent. He didn't say anything. And they looked at him and he said this, I know that you want me to shout out in the pain and weep and despair about all the terrible trouble that's going through. But I won't do that. Because you should know what the message is of being a Jew, he said. He said, and this is, by the way, what was used to be on the Bratslav Shtibel in Warsaw, which there was one as well inside the ghetto. And today, if you go to Yerushalayim, you'll see it above the doorway in Yerushalayim as well. He said, Gewalt Yidden, which means basically Jews, you amazing Jews. Al tityesh, don't despair. He said it in Yiddish, Zed sich nin miyayish. If I pronounced it correctly, Pinchas. Don't despair. Never despair. We have been through lots in our time, and this is just another bump in the road for all of us, for all of humanity. But we can't despair. We have to carry on, and we have to carry on with what we know that is our aim in life. Our aim in life to bring peace, to bring serenity, to bring an understanding of what it means to be a human being in this world, to pass on the messages of what the survivors have told us, to be able to be people that are living beacons, part of a chain, one to the other. And as I know that many of you who have been with me to Poland have known, that I've said this before, but I truly believe it. It's not a time for us to be ordinary people, it's a time for us to be extraordinary people. Extraordinary in chesed, in kindness, extraordinary in making sure that every one of our people are taken care of and every one of humanity is taken care of. Extraordinary in carrying on the flame of what it means to be a Jew. Man sitting in front of me and in front of all of you today is a beacon of that light, completely. Even over the last hour that we've had the pleasure of him being here, you've just got to at least see that beauty over the last hour. So I personally, before we take a couple of questions, which Isaac is going to ask from the chat, I want to thank you so much for giving up your time, for inspiring us, and for being with us this evening, Pinchas.
Thank you. It's actually my duty, as I said, it's my duty to upkeep the memory of all our traditions and to tell people what happened and how how people behaved. There were lots of people. For example, in Skaržisko, there was the commander, the Jewish commander, was a woman who used to be a teacher in a Hasidic, girls' school, and she became a terrible person. But on the other hand, there were many other people in that camp, Jewish policemen and others who tried to save Jews. So you have to tell how things really were, but at the same time, there was an enormous amount of goodness, even at the most terrible, dark times.
Amazing.
I just want to tell you one little story. I was recovering from typhoid, and when you had typhoid in Skaržisko, the chances were either you would die from the typhoid, it was called fleck fever, spotted typhoid, or you were taken to the Krankenstube, which was the kind of the so-called hospital, which wasn't really a hospital, it was an anteroom for death. They used to come with a truck from every few days. They didn't come regularly, so you didn't know if you could run away, and they would take you to the forest and they would shoot you. And when I was recovering, first of all, a Jewish policeman saved me. Another one, not Katz, another one saved me. And secondly, they put me on night duty. And night duty was easier. I was working in the women's hall, and then one of the women came. First of all, they looked after me. They made me do the easiest work, and then at the same time, they said, "Listen, you just sit there, and when some German or Meister comes, a foreman, we will make a noise, and you will start getting yourself busy." And one of them came and gave me an apple. And this was something she took away from herself at the time when we were dying of hunger. And she actually gave this little boy, who she tried to save, an apple taken away from herself. She must have got from one of the Poles that were friendly with her, who used to come in every day to work from Skaržisko. And this is something which, that kind of feeling, that emotion, that kind of thing has stayed with me all my life. How anybody could take away food from themselves, which they had to save themselves and give it to somebody else.
Okay, Isaac, are you here?
Yeah. And thank you, Pinchas, and thank you, Tzvi. There was just one question here from the listeners. Actually, I want to address that before that, because the question is, how do you feel about returning back to Poland? And Pinchas has taken a few years break, so to speak, from going back to Poland. And he had granted us the wonderful blessing of agreeing to coming back on the Living Legacy this year, which would have been leaving in a few days from now. So before I ask Pinchas how he feels about going back to Poland, or what he feels when he goes back to Poland, I want to wish you that a year of health, that God should give you an incredible year of health, and that you're able to come with us in 2021. And I pass the question over to you.
Yetz Hashem.
Amen.
Well, I want to tell you, the first time, for a long time, for over 50 years, I didn't want to go back to Poland. And then Stephen Smith, who is the chief executive of the Shoah Foundation, he and I we met in 1998, and he took my testimony, and also we became friends. And he obviously, he's not Jewish. He's he actually is a Methodist. He trained as a Methodist minister, but he's very much involved in Holocaust education, Holocaust worldwide. And he's the head of Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles. But in 1999 or 2000, I went to visit Bet Shalom, which he started. It was the first Holocaust education museum in England that started by him in a little place called Blackton near Nottingham. And we were sitting in that place, and we were talking about it, and he tried to convince me to go back to Poland. He said it was important for me to go back to Poland. And then, so my whole family, I took my whole family, those that could, and we rented a van, a kind of little bus, and we went back. And it was extremely difficult the first time to go back. And I wanted to go back to the places where I was a happy child. So we didn't go first we didn't go to Auschwitz, we didn't go anywhere. We went to Shavnica, where I was recovering from a double pneumonia, living with Polish Christian people in the mountains for fresh air after being ill for several months. And then we were in Krakow, and we were just to see good things. And then we went back to Łódź. And then once we were in Łódź, I was feeling really very bad. But then once I went the first time, and it was very difficult, especially when I was in Warsaw, and I was shaking and shivering, and I went to the Umschlagplatz, where in that time you could actually go behind there. You couldn't go inside, but you could actually see the Umschlagplatz the way it was overgrown, and you went through wire, kind of barbed wire, which was, they were starting to doing something with it, but I went in there. And, but then I decided that it was very important and I went I've been back 17 times to Poland and Germany. I've been mainly back, I've been on March of the Living on several times with young adults, young Jewish adults from Toronto, but I've also been 17 times with non-Jewish from all the universities, called the March of Remembrance and Hope. And I have found that it was really very cathartic for me, and it was very important because I was taking non-Jewish, in the beginning it was like 62 buses, eventually there wasn't enough money, and it's a whole long story about this, but I felt it was very important to go in situ, in the place where it was, to explain to people what was life before the war, what was life during the war, and what can happen and what shouldn't happen, and what they should do to make the world a better place. And this is what I've been doing, going to universities. I've been at Harvard, I've been at lots of other Catholic universities in England and in New Jersey and in Canada. And I feel that going back to Poland, despite the fact that it's difficult for a human being to go back to places where all his roots were, where everybody that were precious to him, disappeared from his life, and he didn't have a normal life at all. But it's important, and it's a duty, as I keep on saying, it's a duty to go and tell that, because I believe that by showing people what can happen and that what shouldn't happen and what they must do by themselves, drop by drop by drop, to make the world a better place, is important for you to put you through to that. You know what a mangle is? You don't know what a mangle, because they've got washing machines today. A mangle in the old days, you used to, after you wash the head by hand, you put it through to get rid of the water. You went through a mangle, a kind of two things that you turn a thing. I used to help my mother to put the washing to get rid of the water. And that is a mangle. It's a kind of place that you put the washing through. And so you put yourself through the mangle. You do it. That you have to do it because it's your duty to do it. And all the Holocaust survivors that I know that are doing it, it's a very important work.
Thank you, and thank you to continue to do that. We're going to ask you one more question. You had suggested earlier on that you felt bad for the Germans in Czechoslovakia who were being persecuted by the Russians. The question was how you felt while you were in the ghetto. I know you were young, but how you felt towards the kapos, the Jewish police. Did you hate them? Did you like them? Did you feel bad for them? Or what you felt towards, seeing them in the situation that they had to be forced into?
Well, it's very difficult to it's very, in the Warsaw Ghetto, the majority of people did not like the Jewish police. But amongst the Jewish police, there were all kinds of people that were doing good work. And for me, I don't believe that I have the right, taking the circumstances at the time, what was happening there, if you weren't there, but even if you were, I don't have the right to judge them today. If I would find some Jewish policemen, and I know some of them who were terrible, and most of them were actually killed during the war, some by the Jewish resistance, and others, lost their lives in Buchenwald when they came, and people said that they were bad policemen. But I am not prepared to judge everybody. Those that were guilty should have been judged by a court of law. But for me to go and say that all the Jewish policemen were bad or not bad or so forth, I am not prepared to do that. Because if you take the circumstances, basically a lot of them became Jewish policemen because they wanted to save their families. And, and so you don't know the reasons why they became Jewish policemen. Some of them were bad, some of them were not. Some of them tried to save people. Some of them worked with the resistance. You can't. I believe in the court of law. I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't believe. I believe that the death penalty is absolutely wrong. You're not allowed, as far as I'm concerned, as a Jew, you're not allowed to take a life of anybody. You know the story about the Sanhedrin, that they were even considering giving the death penalty to somebody. They were called the Bloody Sanhedrin because they were considering, they couldn't find mitigating circumstances to let that person maybe run away to one of the places so for me, I'm not prepared to judge the Jewish police or I don't know if they were cooperators, collaborators. It's not right for a person today, knowing what were the circumstances in which we lived in the Warsaw Ghetto, what these people were doing and how. Some of them, if they did bad things, or if they were Nazis, collaborators, and they helped, destroy the Jewish people, they should have been judged in a court of law. I don't believe in judicial murder. So as far as I'm concerned, when you condemn somebody to death, I think if somebody is guilty, even of murder, you lock him up for life. You don't let him out. You punish him in a small cell and let him suffer, but as a dogma for other people. But judicial murder is not something that I believe. I don't believe human beings have got the right of killing other human beings. It doesn't matter if it's judiciary or not.
Right. Very well said. Very well said. I just want to conclude by once again thanking you and imparting with you how much you inspire me, especially, and I'm sure those that have listened tonight, to hear of your life and how much you had gone through before even my age, what you've done in your life, to start over and over and over again. I don't think many of us have excuses to be able to live life to the fullest, to be able to start over again. I know I have that trouble in my own career. I've been at the same job now 20 years, and I can't get over that hump of trying to start again. But you show resilience in every country that you went, with your dear wife, who I've had the pleasure to speak to over the last few months and get to know. And she's an incredible partner to you, and you're lucky that you have each other for so many wonderful years. But thank you for continuing to be an inspiration to me and to all of us. It's really a blessing unto all.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to. I can't see everybody, but I can feel everybody. So thank you very much, and stay safe and recover from this, and be healthy and look after yourself. So
thank you.
With God's help, we will all survive, and maybe, please God, next year we will be able to go to Poland.
Amen, amen. I also want to acknowledge a Holocaust survivor that joined us tonight as well, Mrs. Roma Bachman, I want to tell Roma that we were at your mother-in-law's grave last year, and your daughter so beautifully spoke about her grandmother's story. And Roma also has a wonderful story to tell, and I hope one day we can share it with everybody. But I want to thank Roma for coming on as well and being with us. And also, I want to conclude. The Azrieli Foundation put out Pinchas's memoir. It's called In Focus, and rightfully so. If you were to read his story, and you can see how sharp his memory is, and that's what's so incredible about Pinchas's story, is that when he closes his eyes or he starts speaking, it's as if he's living it in living color, like it happened today or yesterday or today. And so the Azrieli Foundation would like to offer anybody who would like a copy of the book. If you want to email me or message me or through the office at Age Toronto, we'll find a way to get you that book. Pinchas writes it from his heart, and the stories are just the harrowing of what he went through. And somebody asked before about how he deals with the PTSD, which I'm sure it's spoken about in the book a lot. Look, you heard it tonight. When he speaks, it's live, it's raw, and his memory is as sharp as it could be. So we wish you continued blessings, and I want to thank everybody for coming on tonight, especially Tzvi, because it's now 4 a.m. in Israel. So thank you for doing that, and God willing, we will see each other soon. Thank you very much again. Thank you, Zach, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov. Good night.